Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're tackling something, well, pretty personal, but also incredibly common. We're diving into Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents by Lindsay C. Gibson.
Ooh, this one hits close to home for a lot of people, I think.
Absolutely. It's about how emotional neglect in childhood can affect us in adulthood.
Especially in our relationships, romantic or otherwise.
Exactly. But the good news is that Gibson doesn't just diagnose the problem. She equips us with tools to heal and build healthier relationships, even if our parents never quite get there emotionally.
I love that framing because so often with this topic, it feels like it's about blaming parents.
Right, but Gibson's central idea is that understanding emotional immaturity isn't about pointing fingers, it's about finding clarity.
And ultimately, it's about freeing ourselves to create fulfilling relationships without waiting for our parents to magically change.
Okay, so let's unpack this concept of emotional neglect a bit. We all kind of understand what it means on a surface level, but how does Gibson really define it?
You know, she uses this really powerful analogy. Imagine a kid who's emotionally more mature, like further along developmentally than their parent.
Ooh, that's an interesting visual.
Yeah, it's like they're speaking different emotional languages. And the parent, they're sort of stuck in their own world.
So they can't truly meet those deeper emotional needs of the child.
Exactly. And this disconnect, this mismatch, it can leave those kids feeling lonely, even insecure, and that can last well into adulthood.
Makes total sense. Now, what really struck me was the checklist Gibson provides for identifying signs of emotional immaturity in parents. I was amazed by how spot on it is.
Oh, tell me about it. I was practically shouting yes at every point.
Right, like overreacting to little things, feeling uncomfortable with real
No,
closeness.
and using their kids as therapists, spilling all their problems.
Seriously, how many of us have been there? It's almost eerie how relatable those traits are.
You're so right. And what's key to understanding this is that these behaviors usually come from the parent's own emotional development. It's often stunted, rooted in their childhood experiences.
Wow, so it's a cycle, but thankfully not one we're destined to repeat.
Exactly. And to help us break the cycle, Gibson outlines four distinct types of emotionally immature parents.
Let's hear them. I remember those from the book. Emotional, driven, passive, and rejecting. Each type, I feel like, affects their children in a unique way.
Absolutely. It's important to recognize which type resonates most with our experience. Okay, first up, emotional parents. These are the folks who are unpredictable, their moods are all over the place, volatile, you could say.
Oh yeah, those are the ones where the whole household revolves around their emotional state.
Right. It's exhausting for everyone involved.
Okay, what about driven parents? I remember those being intense.
Super intense, always focused on achievement, appearances, control, and their kids often end up feeling constantly judged.
Like they can never quite measure up.
Exactly. Now, on the flip side, yeah, the passive parents, they're kind of checked out emotionally. They avoid any kind of conflict.
And often prioritize their own comfort over their kids' needs.
Yeah, it's like a subtle form of neglect, makes their children feel invisible.
Okay, and lastly, there's the rejecting parents. These are the ones who actively shut down their kids' needs.
And create this distance, emotional distance that leaves the child feeling.
Unworthy, yeah.
Exactly. The key takeaway here, though, is that none of these parents are intentionally being cruel. It's truly that their emotional immaturity limits their ability to, provide that consistent love and support that children need.
That's such an important point. And this leads us to those concepts Gibson introduces. Healing fantasies and the role self. Can you explain those a little? They sound kind of,
Intense.
yeah, a little bit.
They can be, but they're so insightful. So, a healing fantasy, think of it as the subconscious belief that if we just tweak something about ourselves,
Our behavior, our achievements, whatever.
that we can finally win over our parents' love and approval. But it sets us up for disappointment because it's relying on someone else changing.
Which, of course, is usually completely out of our
Oh,
control.
exactly. Now, the role self, this is the mask we wear, the persona we develop to try and please our parents. It's about securing our place in the family, even if it means,
Not being our true selves.
you got it.
Mm.
Like, we might become the perpetual helper, always putting everyone else's needs before our own. Or maybe we become obsessed with external validation, thinking if I'm successful enough, maybe they'll finally see me.
It's a survival strategy, but one that ultimately keeps us from being authentic.
Right. And to survive that kind of environment, Gibson talks about two key coping styles, internalizers and externalizers.
Okay, those are pretty self-explanatory, I think. Internalizers blame themselves, right?
Yeah, they're like emotional sponges, absorbing all the blame, thinking they're the problem. They try to fix everything internally, becoming people pleasers.
Always going above and beyond to get that sliver of approval.
Exactly. While externalizers, they direct their frustration
They
outwards.
might lash out, blame everyone else,
Mhm.
kind of seek solutions from the outside world.
Right. It's interesting, though, Gibson notes that internalizers are more likely to be the ones drawn to self-help resources like this book because they're looking for answers. They want to heal.
So amidst all of this, where does the hope come in?
Well, that's where Gibson introduces this beautiful concept of the true self.
Our authentic selves with all our genuine needs and desires, the parts that often get buried under all those layers of
Healing fantasies and role selves, exactly.
It's a powerful idea because it suggests that there's this core of us that's untouched by all of that emotional baggage.
Absolutely. And Gibson argues that the real work, the real journey, is about reconnecting with that true self. And she even suggests that all the emotional distress we feel, while it's unpleasant, can actually be a signal.
A sign that we're out of alignment with our true selves.
Yeah, it's like a wake-up call to start prioritizing self-care, setting healthy boundaries.
She tells this moving story about a guy named Mike who spent his life chasing success.
Oh, I remember Mike. Trying to impress everyone but himself.
Right. He ends up hitting rock bottom, goes through a divorce, loses everything.
But in that breakdown, he finds this amazing liberation
She finally gets to define success on his own terms.
and reconnect with his true self.
That story really embodies this idea that aligning with our true selves ultimately leads to greater fulfillment, even if it means letting go of external validation.
And that's a powerful message.
Okay, so we've identified the problem, we've seen the impact. Now, how do we move forward? How do we navigate relationships with emotionally immature parents without losing ourselves?
That's where Gibson's maturity awareness approach comes in.
It's about relating to our parents without getting sucked into their emotional, what did she call it?
Undertow.
Yes, that's it. She talks about shifting from seeking a full-fledged relationship to maintaining relatedness.
It's subtle but so important.
It is, yeah. So what's the difference?
Relatedness means we communicate with them, but without expecting the same emotional depth that we'd crave in a true relationship,
So accepting their limitations.
while still safeguarding our own well-being.
Okay, I'm starting to see the wisdom in that.
And Gibson offers 3 core strategies within this approach.
Let's hear them.
First, expressing ourselves openly but releasing the need for a specific response.
Oh, that's a tough one. Especially when we've spent years trying to get a certain reaction from them.
It is tough, but it's so freeing to realize that their response is ultimately their responsibility, not ours.
It takes the pressure off, I guess.
Exactly. Second strategy is to focus on the outcome you want, rather than trying to change the whole dynamic of the relationship.
So, for example, if I need to discuss a practical matter with my mom, just stick to that topic.
Right. Don't get sidetracked by hoping for a heartfelt apology or some deep emotional connection. It's likely not going to happen.
Stay focused.
Exactly. And the third strategy, this one's a bit more. Yes, it's about being observational in your interactions, almost like an anthropologist studying a new culture. You just observe.
So observe their behaviors, their triggers, even your own reactions.
Precisely. That detached perspective helps you maintain some emotional balance. You don't get pulled into their drama.
Makes sense. She gives some great examples in the book of how to put this into practice.
Oh, yeah, like Annie and her mom, Betty.
Right. Annie was always trying to get her mom's approval, over-explaining past mistakes, seeking forgiveness.
It was exhausting for her.
And ultimately pointless because Betty was, well, emotionally unavailable. She was terrified of intimacy.
I remember that line. Gibson said Annie's attempts to connect were like plopping a big, fat, writhing snake in her lap.
Oh my gosh, that's so vivid and so true.
It is. So Annie realized that her mom's limitations weren't a reflection on her.
But rather a consequence of Betty's own emotional immaturity.
Exactly. And this awareness, that was the key for Annie to shift from yearning for this deep relationship with her mom to instead maintaining a healthy relatedness.
So she learned to set boundaries, express herself without expectations.
And manage their interactions in a way that protected her own well-being.
It's inspiring to see how she transformed that relationship.
It really is. It's about finding freedom, not frustration.
Right. The maturity awareness approach isn't about cutting off contact completely unless it's absolutely necessary for your safety.
It's about finding ways to engage that feel safe and authentic for you.
even if it means letting go of that idealized vision of the parent-child bond we might hold on to.
Because sometimes that ideal just doesn't match reality.
And that's okay.
It is. It's interesting, when we start healing from emotionally immature parenting,
Hmm.
we often realize how much it affects us internally. It's not just the external interactions, but also how we talk to ourselves.
Totally. It's like we've absorbed that critical voice of our parents and turned it inwards.
It's this constant loop of negative self-talk.
Totally chips away at our self-worth.
And Gibson calls this the inner critic. It's those messages we received growing up, the dismissive ones, the judgmental ones, all playing on repeat in our heads.
So basically, we're carrying our parents around in our minds, even after we've physically moved out and built our own lives.
Exactly. It's wild, right? And this inner critic, it can lead to so much anxiety, perfectionism.
Always afraid of messing up.
Exactly. But the real work is recognizing this inner critic for what it is. It's not our true voice.
Just an echo from the past.
Right, an echo of our parents' own emotional limitations.
So how do we untangle ourselves from this? It feels so ingrained, like part of us.
Well, Gibson has this exercise where you visualize the inner critic as a separate entity.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, like give it a form,
A character.
maybe even a name. By externalizing it, we can start to detach from its pronouncements a bit.
So we disempower it by realizing it's not actually us.
Right, it's an external force that we can choose to challenge.
I like that.
And once we can pinpoint that inner critic, we can start questioning those pronouncements like, are these criticisms actually true?
Right. Would we see these things to a friend?
Exactly. And usually we realize those judgments are harsh, unfair. They just don't align with reality.
It's like we're reclaiming our narrative, rewriting that old script.
Absolutely. And as we become more aware of the inner critic, we can consciously replace those negative messages with positive ones.
Cultivate a more supportive inner voice.
Exactly. One that champions our strengths, celebrates our wins, and offers comfort during tough times.
We become our own cheerleaders.
Exactly. And the shift in our internal dialogue can really impact our experiences. As we build self-compassion, we become less reliant on external validation.
We become more resilient when we face challenges.
It's a journey of self-discovery and, empowerment.
It really is. And speaking of empowerment, setting boundaries is another vital part of healing from this kind of upbringing.
Oh, absolutely. And it can be so tough, especially when we've been conditioned to put everyone else's needs first.
Yeah, it can feel almost rebellious to set boundaries when we've been taught to please and appease others,
But it's an act of self-preservation.
taking care of ourselves.
Right. Gibson emphasizes that boundaries are essential for protecting our mental health, our emotional health, even our physical well-being.
They define what's acceptable and what's not in our interactions with others.
Exactly. It's creating that safe space for ourselves where we feel respected, protected. Now, setting boundaries with emotionally mature people is usually straightforward.
But with emotionally immature parents,
Oh, that's a whole different ballgame. Their reactions can be so unpredictable.
resistance, guilt trips,
Even manipulation. So Gibson offers some practical tips for navigating those tricky situations. First, approach boundary setting with clarity. Be firm, state your needs directly and calmly.
and don't feel the need to over-explain or justify yourself.
Exactly. It's asserting your right to protect your well-being. And then, don't be afraid to enforce those boundaries with consequences. If your parents consistently disregard your limits, you might need to limit contact with them.
Wow, even if it's family.
Sometimes that's necessary. It might be temporary, might be more long-term, but it's about protecting your emotional health.
So ultimately, setting boundaries is about taking responsibility for ourselves, our actions, and reactions.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that while we can't control others, we can control how we respond to them.
And that's a powerful shift in perspective.
It is. And Gibson makes it clear. Setting boundaries isn't about trying to control our parents. It's about owning our own choices.
And honoring our needs.
Exactly. So our parents might not always understand those boundaries.
Why not appreciate them?
Right, but that's okay. Our job isn't to convince them. Our job is to honor ourselves.
Our needs, our priorities.
Exactly. And setting boundaries is also about acknowledging our own limitations.
Oh, that's an interesting point.
We can't be everything to everyone. It's okay to say no.
Especially when we're feeling drained or overwhelmed.
Exactly. Gibson reminds us that genuine self-care isn't selfish. It's essential for our well-being.
It's about filling our own cup so we can show up as our best selves.
Exactly. And speaking of self-care, one of Gibson's most profound insights is the need for self-compassion.
Oh, that's so important, especially for those of us raised by emotionally immature parents.
It can feel so foreign, even undeserved, right?
Like we need to earn it somehow.
Yeah, like kindness is conditional. But Gibson argues that self-compassion is absolutely crucial for healing.
It's about offering ourselves the same understanding and forgiveness that we'd offer a loved one who is struggling.
It's about recognizing that we are human, we all mess up, we all deserve gentleness.
You'd care.
Exactly. And Gibson encourages us to practice self-compassion through mindfulness, journaling, positive self-talk.
So we become aware of our inner dialogue and replace that harsh criticism with nurturing messages.
You got it. And recognizing our emotional needs, meeting those needs.
Prioritizing our well-being.
Exactly. Even if it means saying no or setting boundaries. Gibson has this powerful visualization, where you imagine yourself as a small child.
A child who needs comfort.
And you offer that child the same love and reassurance that you'd offer any child.
Oh, wow, that's beautiful.
It is, right. And it's such a powerful way to access that well of compassion within and extend it to ourselves.
I love that. So as we cultivate self-compassion, we can start to heal those old wounds, right?
Exactly. And build a more loving relationship with ourselves.
Which leads to another huge realization. Our parent shortcomings don't diminish our worth.
That one can be so hard to grasp, especially after years of trying to earn their love and approval.
Like, their approval equals our worth.
Right. But Gibson stresses their emotional immaturity, it's their journey, not ours.
We can't force them to change.
And we're not responsible for their emotional well-being.
So it's letting go of that burden of trying to fix them or make them happy.
It's incredibly freeing. And it's also realizing that their inability to give us what we needed, that doesn't make us any less worthy as individuals.
Separating our identity from theirs.
Exactly. It's recognizing that our worth doesn't come from them, it comes from within.
It's a journey of self-validation and self-acceptance.
And one of the most liberating aspects of this whole process is realizing we have the power to choose who we let into our lives.
Like we get to build a chosen family.
Exactly. We can surround ourselves with people who can offer us that love and support that might have been missing in our childhoods.
We break free from those old patterns and create relationships that actually nourish us.
Relationships that feel authentic. And Gibson really stresses seeking out emotionally mature people, people who can offer genuine connection, reciprocity.
So what are some of the hallmarks of emotional maturity that we should look for in potential partners or friends?
Well, first and foremost, look for people who are self-aware. They understand their emotions, their impact on others.
They're not afraid to admit when they're wrong?
Exactly. They take responsibility for their actions. And then look for empathy. Can they tune into your feelings, offer support?
And validate your experience.
Exactly. They're good listeners. Make you feel seen and heard. Gibson also emphasizes finding people who respect boundaries.
So they're not controlling, guilt-tripping, or taking advantage of you.
Exactly. They get that you have needs and respect your right to say no.
It's also important to look for people who are reciprocal in their relationships.
They give as much as they take.
Put in the effort.
Exactly. And last but certainly not least, look for people who are enjoyable to be around.
Life is too short for energy vampires.
Right. Find people who make you laugh, who inspire you.
And make you feel good about yourself.
Exactly.
Gibson reminds us, though, that building these healthy relationships, it takes time.
It takes conscious effort.
It's about choosing wisely and investing in connections that feel right.
Connections that feel fulfilling.
It's creating that support system that really nourishes us. All right, welcome back to our deep dive into adult children of emotionally immature parents.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground so far, but now I'm really excited to shift from understanding the past to, actually creating a brighter future.
Yeah. It's time to get proactive.
Exactly. So we're going to delve into how we can cultivate emotional maturity within ourselves and also how to attract partners who are, on that same wavelength.
Emotionally healthy partners. Because, let's face it, that can be a real struggle for folks who had emotionally immature parents.
It is, yeah. It's like we're drawn to what's familiar, even if it's not healthy for us.
Right. It's like we're subconsciously trying to recreate those childhood dynamics, hoping for a different outcome this time.
Makes sense, but not very helpful. So let's start with ourselves first. How does Gibson define emotional maturity? What does it actually look and feel like?
Well, she highlights several key characteristics: self-awareness, empathy, responsibility, resilience, and the capacity for genuine intimacy.
Okay, that's quite a list. Let's break those down a bit.
Yeah.
Self-awareness seems like the foundation, right?
Absolutely. It's the bedrock. It's about knowing our own emotions, recognizing our triggers, our strengths and weaknesses.
And understanding how our actions affect other people.
Exactly. It's being honest with ourselves. And then, hand in hand with self-awareness comes responsibility.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, because emotionally mature people, they take ownership. They don't blame others for their problems.
Or expect others to fix everything for them.
Right, they step up and own their part. And then you've got empathy, which is the ability to understand other people's feelings.
Even when they're totally different from our own.
Exactly. It's recognizing that everyone sees the world through their own lens.
Their experiences shape how they see things.
Exactly. And empathy, it creates that bridge. It fosters understanding and compassion, even when people have different views.
It's powerful. And then Gibson talks about resilience, which is the ability to bounce back from, well, life's inevitable setbacks.
To navigate challenges, to
Yeah.
keep going, even when things get tough. It's developing that growth mindset, seeing obstacles as opportunities to learn.
So we don't give up easily.
Exactly. And then lastly, there's the capacity for intimacy. This one, I think, can be the hardest for those of us who grew up with, emotionally unavailable parents.
Yeah, it's that vulnerability, right? Letting
Yeah.
someone truly see us, flaws and all.
Exactly. It's scary, but it's also the foundation for authentic connection.
Okay, so we've explored what it means to be emotionally mature. Now let's talk about attracting partners who are also emotionally healthy. I know this is where a lot of people get tripped up.
It is, yeah. Because those old patterns die hard. We can find ourselves drawn to partners who, well, kind of replicate those dysfunctional dynamics we experienced in childhood.
So like I said before, trying to recreate the past and get a different ending, but Gibson encourages us to, break free from those patterns, become aware of those red flags that might signal emotional immaturity in a potential partner.
So, what are some of those red flags?
Yeah, what should we be looking out for?
Well, first and foremost, pay attention to how they treat you. Do they respect your boundaries? Do they really listen?
Do they make you feel safe?
Exactly. Or are they dismissive of your concerns? Do they try to control you?
Make you feel like you're walking on eggshells?
Exactly. Notice how they handle disagreements. Do they get defensive, aggressive?
Do they take responsibility for their part or blame everyone else?
Exactly. And their level of self-awareness. Are they tuned in to their own emotions? Do they understand their impact on others?
Or are they totally clueless about their own patterns and how they affect people?
Right. Trust your gut feeling here. Do you feel comfortable around them? Or do you feel anxious, drained, like you're constantly on edge?
That intuition is usually right.
It is. Listen to it. If something feels off, it probably is.
Okay, so that's about avoiding the wrong people. But what about attracting the right ones? Is it just a matter of luck?
While luck might play a role, but it's more about becoming the type of person we want to attract.
Embodying those qualities we talked about.
Exactly. So Gibson suggests focusing on personal growth. Do things that feed your soul, expand your horizons.
Connect with who you truly are.
Right. Prioritize your well-being, physical, emotional, and mental.
To surround ourselves with positive influences, good books, supportive friends.
Exactly. And most importantly, nurture that self-compassion. Treat yourself with kindness, with understanding.
Like you would a dear friend.
Exactly. Because as we cultivate emotional maturity within ourselves, we'll naturally attract people who are on that same path.
It's a process of alignment.
Exactly. And a beautiful one.
Well, this deep dive into Lindsay C. Gibson's Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents has been incredible. I feel like we've uncovered so much.
We have. It's been a real journey.
We've explored the impact of emotional neglect, the challenges of setting boundaries, the importance of self-compassion, and the power of choosing healthy relationships.
And ultimately, I think Gibson's message is one of hope. We're not defined by our past. We have the power to create a different future.
A future filled with genuine connection, joy, and, really living as our true selves.
Absolutely. And her book is such a valuable resource for anyone who's felt unseen or unheard or unloved.
It's a powerful reminder that we are all worthy of love and belonging.
And that we have the capacity to build those fulfilling relationships we all deserve.
That's a beautiful message to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Be sure to check out Gibson's book for even more insights. And remember, you are worthy of love, you are capable of healing, and you have the power to create the life and relationships you desire.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you. Until next time, keep growing,